Picture this. 200,000 men stand on one side of a narrow road, maybe more. Nobody knows the exact number. On the other side, there are only a few thousand men, and in the front line, there are just 300. Those 300 men know something terrible. They know they are going to die, not maybe, not probably, they know it for certain, and they still walk forward. This is the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass in ancient Greece. Why would 300 men choose to die for a fight they knew they could not win? How did one small army change the way the whole world remembers courage? To answer that, you have to go back to the beginning. Some battles are not won with swords, they are won with the choice to stand. In the early 5th century before Christ, two worlds existed side by side. They were very different from each other. The first world was the Persian Empire. It was huge. It stretched from India in the east to Egypt in the west. Millions of people lived under its rule. The king of Persia was Xerxes, the son of Darius, the ruler of the largest empire on earth. Xerxes had gold, he had ships, he had soldiers from dozens of different nations. The second world was Greece. Greece was small. It was not one country, it was many small city-states. Each city-state had its own government, its own army, and its own rules. Two of these city-states matter most to our story, Sparta and Athens. Sparta was different from every other Greek city. From a young age, Spartan boys left their families. They trained to fight. They learned to survive with almost nothing. Pain did not stop them. Fear did not stop them. This hard training was called the agoge, the Spartan system for raising warriors. By the time a Spartan man became a soldier, he was ready for anything. Athens was different too, but in another way. Athens loved ideas. Athens loved art, theater, and philosophy. But Athens also had something else, a strong navy, a fleet of fast wooden ships that could rule the sea. These two small Greek cities, Sparta and Athens, would soon need each other. But in the early 5th century, that was still hard to imagine. Most of the world looked at Greece and saw nothing special. Just small towns arguing with each other, fighting each other, too weak to matter. Meanwhile, Persia grew stronger every year. Xerxes could call soldiers from many lands, from Egypt, from Babylon, from India, from Ethiopia. Ancient writers said his army reached over 1 million men. Modern historians think the real number was smaller, maybe around 100,000 up to 300,000 fighters. Even the smaller number is enormous for that time in history. Think about that for a second. One king, one empire, one army bigger than most nations had ever seen, and on the other side, a handful of small cities that could not even agree on a single leader. It looked hopeless for Greece. It looked easy for Persia. Then Xerxes made a promise. 10 years before our story, in 490 years before Christ, something happened that Persia never forgot. Persia had already tried to conquer Greece once. King Darius, the father of Xerxes, sent an army to punish Athens. The two armies met near a place called Marathon. Everyone expected a quick Persian victory. Instead, the smaller Greek army won. Athens defeated Persia on the plain of Marathon. For Persia, this was not just a loss. This was an insult. A small city had beaten the mighty Persian Empire. Darius wanted revenge, but before he could try again, he died. His son Xerxes took the throne, and Xerxes made a promise to his father's memory. He promised to finish what Darius started. He promised to conquer Greece completely and to punish Athens for Marathon. For years, Xerxes prepared. He did not want another small defeat. This time, he wanted total power. He wanted an army so large that Greece could never resist it. He built roads. He built supply stations along the way to Greece so his soldiers would never run out of food. He even built something incredible, a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, the narrow strip of water between Asia and Europe. Hundreds of ships were tied together, side by side, to create a bridge wide enough for an entire army to cross by foot. When storms destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes did not give up. He built it again. Ancient stories even say he punished the sea itself for the storm, ordering his men to whip the water. We cannot know if that story is completely true, but it shows how much Xerxes wanted this invasion to succeed. Finally, the bridge was ready, and Xerxes led his massive army across the water, from Asia into Europe, moving toward Greece. News of this army traveled fast. Every Greek city heard about it. An army of hundreds of thousands marching toward Greece, ready to burn every city that resisted. Greece had to decide. Some cities decided to surrender before the fighting even started. They sent gifts of earth and water to Xerxes, a traditional sign that meant, "We accept your rule." But not every city agreed to give up. A small group of Greek states, led by Athens and Sparta, decided to fight. They knew the numbers were terrible. They knew Persia had more soldiers, more ships, and more gold, but they also knew what would happen if they did nothing. If Persia won, Greek freedom would end. Every city would answer to Xerxes. Every family would live under Persian rule. So these Greek cities made a plan. They needed time. They needed a place where a small army could hold back a giant one, even for a short while. They needed to find a location where numbers would not matter as much as courage and geography. That location already existed, a narrow pass between the mountains and the sea, a place called Thermopylae. But before we go there, we need to understand who Greece chose to lead this defense, and why that choice would soon shock the entire ancient world. The Greek cities turned to Sparta, and Sparta was about to make one of the strangest military decisions in history. Some battles are not won with swords, they are won with the choice to stand. And Sparta was preparing to make that choice. They knew what that meant. In Sparta, the news about Persia caused a serious problem. The Greek cities needed an army right away, but Sparta could not send its full army immediately. Why not? Because of religion. The Spartans were in the middle of a sacred festival called the Carnia. During this festival, Spartan law did not allow the army to march to war. Breaking this rule was seen as an offense against the gods. This created a difficult situation. Greece needed soldiers now, but Sparta's laws said wait. So Sparta found a solution. They would not send the whole army yet. Instead, they would send a smaller group immediately, just to hold the position, while the main Spartan army finished the religious festival and followed later. The king of Sparta, Leonidas, would lead this smaller group. Leonidas was not a young king. He was already older, experienced, and deeply respected by his soldiers. As a Spartan king, he had trained his whole life under the harsh Spartan system. He understood war, he understood sacrifice, and he understood duty. Leonidas chose exactly 300 men to go with him. This number was not random. In Spartan tradition, king's personal guard usually included 300 warriors. But Leonidas made one very specific choice. He only picked men who already had living sons. Think about why that mattered. If a man had a son, his family line would continue even if he died in battle. Leonidas was choosing men prepared to die. He was not hoping they would survive. He was building a group ready for a mission that might end in death. This detail tells us something important. Leonidas did not expect an easy victory. From the very beginning, this was designed to be a stand, not just a battle. Along the way, more soldiers joined the Spartans. Other Greek cities sent their own warriors, men from Thespiae, men from Thebes, and fighters from other city-states nearby. In total, the combined Greek force at this stage numbered around 7,000 soldiers. 7,000 men against an army that could be 10 times bigger, maybe more. It seemed impossible. But these men were not choosing this location by accident. They had picked one of the only places in Greece where a small force could fight back against a giant one. They knew what that meant. The location was called Thermopylae, which means the hot gates. The name came from natural hot springs found near the pass. Thermopylae was a narrow strip of land between steep mountains on one side and the sea on the other. In some spots, the path was only wide enough for a small number of soldiers to stand side by side, sometimes as narrow as about 15 meters. This narrow space was the key to the entire plan. In an open field, the huge Persian army could surround a small Greek force easily. But inside a narrow pass, only a limited number of soldiers could attack at the same time. Numbers mattered less here. Position mattered more. The Greeks understood this advantage. They repaired an old wall inside the pass, making it stronger. They set up their defense right at the narrowest point, where the mountains almost touched the sea. Leonidas placed his soldiers carefully. The heavily armored Spartan soldiers, known as hoplites, stood in the front lines. They carried large round shields, long spears, and short swords. Their armor was heavy, but it protected them well in close combat. The Greek soldiers used a special fighting formation called the phalanx. In this formation, soldiers stood close together, shield next to shield, spear next to spear, forming almost a wall of metal and wood. If the formation stayed strong, it was extremely hard to break. While the Greeks prepared, word came that the massive Persian army was approaching. Xerxes' forces marched along the coast, supported by a huge navy sailing nearby. The size of the army was almost impossible to imagine. Soldiers stretched for miles along the road. When the Persian army finally reached Thermopylae, Xerxes was confident. He believed a show of force would be enough. He sent a message to the Greeks, offering them a simple choice: surrender your weapons and you will be spared. Leonidas' answer became legendary. According to ancient writers, Leonidas replied with only 2 words in Greek: "Malon labe," which means, "come and take them." It was a short answer, but it sent a clear message. These men were not planning to surrender, they were planning to fight. Then the Persians attacked. For the first 2 days, the battle went very differently than Xerxes expected. Xerxes ordered wave after wave of soldiers to attack the narrow pass. He believed that with so many men, victory would come quickly. But the geography worked against him. Only a small number of Persian soldiers could reach the Greek line at one time. The rest waited behind, unable to help. The Greek phalanx held strong. Spartan soldiers fought with discipline, moving as one unit, protecting each other with their shields. Wave after wave of Persian attackers were pushed back. On the second day, Xerxes sent his most elite soldiers, a group known as the Immortals. This was Persia's best fighting force, feared across the empire. Even they could not break through the narrow Greek defense. The Immortals attacked, and like the soldiers before them, they were forced to retreat. By the end of the second day, Persian losses were heavy. Ancient sources suggest that Persia lost far more soldiers than the Greeks in these 2 days of fighting. The exact numbers are debated by historians, but the pattern is clear. A small, disciplined army was holding back an empire. For Xerxes, this was humiliating. His massive force could not defeat a few thousand men in a narrow pass. Something had to change, or his campaign would stall completely. That change came from an unexpected place. Not from more soldiers, not from more weapons, it came from a betrayal. Then someone talked. On the night of the second day, a local man named Ephialtes came to the Persian camp. He knew this land very well. He knew about a hidden mountain path that went around Thermopylae, a path that led directly behind the Greek position. Ephialtes offered to show this path to the Persians. His reasons are still debated by historians. Some say he wanted money, some say he wanted favor from Xerxes. Whatever the reason, his choice changed everything. Xerxes accepted the offer immediately. That same night, he sent a group of soldiers led by the Immortals along the secret mountain path. Their goal was simple: reach the other side of the pass and attack the Greeks from behind. News of this movement reached Leonidas before dawn. A group of Greek soldiers had been guarding that mountain path, but they failed to stop the Persian force in time. Leonidas now understood the truth. His army was about to be surrounded on 2 sides. This was the moment that defined the entire battle. Leonidas had a choice. He could retreat with his whole army and save most of his men, or he could stay and fight, knowing that staying meant death. He chose something in between. Leonidas ordered most of the Greek soldiers to leave. Thousands of men from various city-states retreated to fight another day to protect Greece in future battles. There was no shame in this decision. Their deaths at Thermopylae would not help Greece as much as their survival for the wars still ahead. But Leonidas himself did not leave. His 300 Spartans stayed with him. A group of about 700 soldiers from Thespia also chose to stay, refusing to abandon their allies. A number of soldiers from Thebes remained as well, though their exact role in the final battle is still debated by historians. These men knew exactly what waited for them. The mountain path was already lost. Persian soldiers were closing in from behind. In front of them stood the main Persian army, still furious after 2 days of failed attacks. There was no path to victory anymore. There was no way to win this fight. But there was still a choice to make, and they made it. Then they made their choice. On the third day, the final battle began. Leonidas moved his remaining soldiers to a wider part of the pass. no longer trying only to defend, but now trying to kill as many enemy soldiers as possible before the end came. This was not a battle for survival anymore. This was a battle for time and for meaning. The Persian army attacked from the front. At the same time, the force that crossed the mountain path arrived from behind. The small Greek group was now trapped between two Persian forces. Even in this hopeless position, the Spartans fought with incredible discipline. Their spears broke first, snapped from the force of endless fighting. They continued fighting with their swords. When their swords broke or were lost, some men fought with their bare hands and even with their teeth, according to ancient accounts. Leonidas fought at the front of his men. At some point during the battle, he was killed. According to ancient historians, a fierce struggle broke out around his body as Greek soldiers tried to protect their king even after his death. In the end, it made no difference. The Persian numbers were simply too great. One by one, the remaining Spartans fell. By the end of the day, all 300 Spartans were dead. The soldiers from Thermopylae who stayed also died fighting beside them. Thermopylae had fallen, Persia had won the battle. But something strange happened. Xerxes had lost thousands of soldiers to defeat only a few thousand defenders. His mighty empire had been delayed for 3 full days by a tiny force in a narrow pass. And more than that, the story of what happened at Thermopylae began spreading across Greece almost immediately. This sacrifice gave the rest of Greece something valuable: time. Time to prepare their navy, time to organize other city-states, time to plan future battles. Just weeks later, the Greek navy defeated the Persian fleet at a place called Salamis. The following year, Greek land forces defeated the Persian army at Plataea. Persia's massive invasion, the one that seemed unstoppable, eventually failed completely. Historians still debate how much Thermopylae directly caused these later victories, but nobody debates its effect on Greek spirit. The 300 Spartans became a symbol. They showed that a small, determined force could stand against impossible odds, even without winning the battle itself. But the story did not end there, so let's return to our first questions. Why would 300 men choose to die for a fight they knew they could not win? They chose it because some things matter more than survival. Freedom mattered to them. Loyalty to their allies mattered to them. Giving Greece a chance to survive mattered more than their own lives. How did one small army change the way the whole world remembers courage? They changed it by proving something simple but powerful. Numbers do not always decide the outcome of history. Sometimes, a small group with absolute determination can shape events far beyond their size. Some battles are not won with swords, they are won with the choice to stand. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae did not save Greece through victory. They saved it through sacrifice. Their stand gave Greece time, and that time changed everything that came after. Even today, thousands of years later, the name Thermopylae still means something. It reminds us that courage is not about winning every fight. Courage is about standing for something, even when the odds are against you, even when the outcome seems certain. You do not need to win every battle to change history. Sometimes you only need to stand. If this story hit you, hit subscribe. New history told the simple way every single week. Drop a comment: which battle should we cover next?